Frank.
All right.
Everybody hear me all right? Cool. Okay. So I'm going to wander around a little bit while we give this presentation today because that helps me try and keep my motivation level up, my focus up. But we're going to actually start today by going completely off script from what I had planned, and we're going to go back in time a little bit to 2013. Back in 2013, I made a decision in my life that pretty much everybody that I knew thought was completely bizarre. At the time, I was working for a small company, great culture, great environment. It was the sort of place that you went to work and you felt like you were part of a family, right? On Fridays, we would get together and we would all have Friday lunch as a company. The president of the company would make lunch for everybody. It was fantastic. And the decision that I made was to quit that job and go to work for another organization, an organization that had contacted me, and the vision that they described to me was something that I really believed in. The business plan that they had was something that I thought really made a lot of sense. And I decided that that was what I was going to go for. My friends thought it was odd. My family thought I was crazy. My wife, bless her heart, she put up with me. And what happened then was that I went to work for TopTel really with just one question in my mind. And that was, how does it actually work? How does the company function? How do you build culture in that sort of an environment? And that's what we're here to talk about today. So we're not going to talk about the failings of culture, which has been in the headlines of every Silicon Valley press since the beginning of 2017. But what instead we're going to talk about is how you can use culture to turn your team into a high-performing organization. And specifically, how that applies when you are taking advantage of another rapidly growing tech trend, which is the remote workplace, right? The expansion into freelance work, talent on demand. So if we go back and we look at the effect that culture has, right? What we have found is that it greatly affects the success or the failure of your team. So why are we here talking about culture? This is a pretty full room, interestingly. And as a team, especially if you are beginning a new team, there are a lot of challenges that you face, right? You've got engineering problems, you've got product problems, you've got growth problems. And those are always going to be there. Those problems aren't going to go away. And there are certainly best practices that you'll be hearing all week long here about how to handle those. But the culture of your team underlies all of that. It pervades everything that you do. And that's why we're here talking about culture. So with that, we also want to start talking about what culture is. So as we define it today, culture is more than just foosball tables. It's more than just office pets or free beer Fridays, right? So what is culture? And what is culture such that it can drive all of the things that we've talked about for the past few minutes? So we're going to do a little bit of an exercise, right? So I would like everybody to take a moment and picture in their mind what culture is to you. How does it look for your particular organization? So we'll just give a moment. Look around. Everybody got something in mind? Good. All right, so this is what I have for us today. Culture is a pattern of shared assumptions and values discovered or developed by a group which are proven to lead to success. And this definition is distilled down from the writings and research of Edgar Schein, who is the professor emeritus at the MIT Sloan School of Management, who spent his career studying this particular field. And his definition has been boiled down a little bit for the sake of our conversation today, but still maintaining its particular essence. So with this in mind, right, how does this relate to what you were all thinking, right? This has nothing to do with what was probably in your head, right? I'm assuming. So I find that it's best if we visualize this a little bit. So what you see in front of you right now is a pyramid with layers. And my guess is that what most of you are thinking of as culture is at the top, right? So the things at the top of this pyramid are the visible items, the visible portions of culture. And as you move down, what you see is that it's kind of like an iceberg. There's more underneath the surface than what you see sticking out the top. But the deeper down you go, it's less visible, but it's more important. And it provides the foundation for everything else. So at the top, you have the physical stuff. You have the processes and procedures that everybody is going to see from the outside. You've got the stories that really make your culture what it is, right? But underneath of that, you have the values. These are the stated values, perhaps, of the company, what you might see in the mission statement, what you would see during the training or on the jobs page of a particular organization. And this is also, perhaps, what you would see lived out in the lives of the people who work at that particular company. And that is the values. But deeper still lie the underlying assumptions of a company. And these are often unspoken. But what you will find at this level is that the assumptions that a company holds are often heavily influenced by the fundamental beliefs that the founding team has. So, for example, the geopolitical underpinnings of their homeland, or the training and ingraining that they went through with the training in their chosen career. And as an example, you could think of this as human nature being one piece of this, right? So what is human nature? Are humans inherently good, or are humans inherently lazy? And the answer to that is going to affect everything that your company does, from the bottom to the top. And as founders of a young team, you can easily see how the assumptions at the bottom are going to bubble their way up to the top. So, for example, the founders of a team are going to have certain beliefs. They're going to share or voice probably a small number of values. And then they're going to begin hiring people. And whether they realize it or not, they are probably going to be hiring people who share some of that same value set. And as they do that, the values of that young team then are going to affect the artifacts, what you see within that organization. And when the team then begins to face challenges, both internal and external, the values that they have, which lead to success, are the ones that become solidified within the culture, and the others fade to the background or disappear entirely. And that is how Edgar Schein's definition of culture ties into all of the things that you see. So, moving on, what I thought would be helpful for us all today would be to look at some of these examples, because again, going back to remote, we want to explore what the differences are. So what I've chosen to do today is take some examples from well-known companies, traditional work environments, and then compare those to how they would look if we were to put them in a remote environment. So the first of the main principles that we're going to look at today is going to be hiring. So hire and develop the best. Now, this is taken from Amazon's leadership principles, but you're going to find something about hiring in pretty much every value list across every organization. And with this, it might be too obvious for some, right? Because obviously, you cannot grow and scale a company if you do not hire people to help grow and scale your company. But even as individuals, right? If we look at Tim Ferriss in the 4-Hour Workweek, he tells us all that we need to have a team of virtual assistants working tirelessly in the background to help us succeed, right? We need to scale ourselves. But that misses the point that hiring is more than just scaling. Hiring is how you pass along your cultural DNA. So in a remote environment, we have a number of different items that we would add to this. So the first of those is higher cultural fit. And the reason that I would put something like this in here is because when you are working in a remote environment, the people that you bring on board are not going to be physically immersed in your culture on a day-to-day basis, right? You cannot rely on some sort of absorb and conform strategy to get everybody as part of a single unified whole. So hiring for cultural fits is going to ensure that you are bringing along people. You're bringing people on board who are going to be able to quickly hit the ground running. And those individuals can begin contributing. And more importantly, they will not be individuals who end up harming your team. Because on the flip side of this is that if you hire somebody who is a bad cultural fit, you've all seen this, right? They eventually begin to eat away at the team. It damages more than just themselves. And in a remote environment, you cannot see this. You cannot pick up the body language that they're unhappy or that they're uncomfortable. So higher cultural fits is the first point. The next one that we're going to add here is higher self-motivated problem solvers, right? Self-motivated problem solvers are interesting because we all know that not everybody is cut out for a remote work environment. And it may be because they simply thrive on face-to-face interaction. It could be because they simply need the structure of an office environment to help avoid the distractions of life and home. But self-motivated individuals have the drive and the passion to continue working and to continue pushing toward a goal without you looking over their shoulder. And the next piece of this is problem solvers, right? So whether you are hiring people whether the people that you hire are working on the business case for your next big initiative, or whether they are troubleshooting ISP problems in the closing seconds before a scheduled client call, everybody on the team, essentially, physically, is alone. And remote workers can take these kind of challenges in stride. It is just simply part of what they do. So that's why this is another important piece that we feel would be added onto the bullet list of hiring values in a company. So the next area that we're going to look at would be communication. And you'll find this on the now famous Netflix culture deck. Share information openly, broadly, and deliberately. And it's funny because you'll find communication mentioned on pretty much every value list at any company anywhere, usually described in some sort of vague way, which I find really kind of. So to this, though, in a remote environment, we would need to add, again, some additional considerations. So in a remote environment, what you would have is communicate continuously. Because when you are working remotely, there is no hum of the office. There is no buzz going on around you of the work being done. There are no cheers going up to let you know of small victories in other areas of the company. There is no general buzz to let you know what other initiatives are taking place around you. So without that, in a remote environment, there is quite literally just silence. So when you are working remotely, you have to make sure that you are intentional about this. And there are many different ways that this might look. We all have meetings, right? Everybody has meetings. So what you want to look at would be how you conduct those, rather than it being just a stream of updates in a unidirectional fashion. A meeting becomes a multifaceted opportunity where you are given an opportunity to inspire and lead. You're given an opportunity to open up the floor for questions, comments, or concerns that might be shared with you. But most importantly, meetings are two-way. They involve everybody in the team. It is an opportunity for everybody to communicate in both directions and amongst each other. And that helps everybody, again, feel like they're part of this unified whole. And this extends to our one-on-ones, right? As leaders, when we are having one-on-ones with our team, these should be just as disciplined as the meetings that we have. They should have a regular cadence. They should have some sort of semi-structured agenda. They give an opportunity for two-way communication, perhaps in a bit more of a closed environment for people who have deeper concerns or other ideas that they may not feel comfortable voicing in a group. And then from there, you also have just the general conversation that takes place. So the buzz of the office then becomes streams of activity on Slack or in chat, where you have the opportunity to celebrate those wins, for example. You've got GIFs and emojis that come to the rescue and allow you to express emotion when you are talking in a text-based chat. But then we move on to the next point. Communicate with clarity. So while emojis and GIFs are great, emojis and GIFs don't convey meaning as much as we would like them to, right? So sarcasm, emotional responses, they get lost. And as you have remote teams and you expand across international borders, and as you expand across various different language sets, what you end up with can be a lot of miscommunication that happens. So where the emojis would fail us would be, for example, from my own team. I've got some of them here mixed among the crowd. They'll love this. So if I get into a chat with my team and I say, hey, we've got a couple clients. I think they may have fallen through the cracks. Here's a list, right? Everybody needs to go through this list, check up on the people that are yours, and make sure that you've touched base with them. Great? How do people respond? Thumbs up. What the heck does that even mean, right? I've asked you to go through and do a task, and what I get is a thumbs up. So does that mean that you like the idea? Does it mean that you're considering doing it at some point in the future? Or does it mean that it's already done? I have no idea. Then I have to go back and I have to start clarifying with people, with every single person, to make sure that it's actually been done, right? So communicate with clarity. And the next point, which is closely, again, is communicate with video. And in a culture, or in a broader culture, where SMS messaging is a pillar of human relationships, it can be, I think, a little bit lost that face-to-face communication or video communication is a tool that we ought to be using. Because after all, we don't need video to convey words to people. But what we're forgetting is that we do need face-to-face or video communication if we truly want to convey meaning, and we want to convey that the first time. So from there, video, again, comes into play. So you can see when you're explaining something, like I was 2 weeks ago with a couple of other executives at TopTal going through an analysis. And I could see that Dror was really thinking. He was like, his brow was furrowed, and you could tell that the wheels of thought were turning in his mind. And I knew that I hadn't explained well enough. So I was able to pause, shift, go back, get his thoughts, his questions out in the open, clarify and move on, probably saving us hours of miscommunication after the fact. But that's what video allows us to do. It allows us to use the most powerful tool in the arsenal for human communication. Moving on. Regardless of how you think about your team, whether you consider it to be a family, whether you consider it to be like a professional sports team, or if you consider it to be an exclusive club, right? There's always some element of relationship that needs to be built among your team. So here you have a quote that was taken from the Zappos family core values, which is build a positive team and family spirit. This is fantastic. How would this look in a remote environment? So working remotely, you do not, again, have the opportunity to really immerse people in your culture. You are not able to walk down the hall and use nods or smiles to help make others feel like they're welcome, accepted, and part of the whole. So you have to use other tools. And the way that this is going to look for you is going to be different than the way that it looks for us. It's going to be uniquely yours. But what the point is here is that you need to be intentional about it. So at TopTal, we have certain chats that are dedicated for just off-topic items where people can talk about their pets, their personal life, their hobbies. We have semi-regular calls where individuals are able to chat about these off-topics or unwind at the end of a long week. But regardless of how you do it, again, you have to be intentional. So this was something that I couldn't find a corresponding value for. So culture is a pillar of company onboarding, right? Said nobody ever, in their value decks at least. But the reason I bring it up is because it ties very closely to the last point. So when you are being intentional about building relationships within your team and modeling that for your team, you need to be intentional about onboarding for company culture. Bear with me. Intentional about cultural onboarding. And this is, for us as leaders, to model and value out for everybody that is on our team. We need to make sure that this is done, again, in a way that people are able to become part of that whole, because we're not able to surround them and immerse them in who we are as a company. So how does this look then? If we go back to the pyramid, it starts to shift a little bit. You still have your artifacts at the top. They change slightly. You have your values in the middle. But what you'll notice is that the values have become larger. The section is bigger because there's less unspoken. Because we as leaders need to make sure that we examine those unspoken assumptions and that we voice those in the form of values so that the rest of the team can absorb that and take it and expand it and model it for everybody else who joins the company. And you have your underlying assumptions. Again, we better understand them. We do our best to bring them to light and speak those unspoken values. So what I've described here today is not a prescriptive formula. It is instead food for thought. It's for you to take this and go back to your teams and think about how you structure that. But the next questions that are going to be asked are, how do you do this within a team? And we don't have a lot of time, and it would take an entirely separate talk to go through these points. But what are the levers that you can pull as leaders to grow or change culture in the way that you want it to be done? So what you pay attention to as leaders affects your culture. How you react to crises within your culture or within your company affects your culture. How you allocate resources, including your attention as leaders, affects your culture. How you teach, coach, and model also, again, affects your culture. What you reward or punish. I think this one's a little bit intuitive for people. What you reward or punish is going to affect your culture. And again, how you select and hire, and even how you offboard individuals becomes a part of this as well. So wrapping up, I wanted to give one final consideration, and that's this, that a strong culture does not need to be a rigid culture. And then in closing, back to the story that we began at the beginning of this, the interesting journey that I've been on as an individual now for the last 4.5 years has shown me that you can have a stronger company culture and you can have stronger relationships in an entirely remote organization even than you can possibly have, in some instances, in a face-to-face office. It's counterintuitive, but if it is done right, the culture that you have as a remote team can be an incredible strength and even outpace typical face-to-face organizations. So with that, I don't know if I've got any time left. We're done. So thank you very much. If you have any questions, you can connect with me afterwards.